How do you deploy October CMS to a live server or a shared hosting? That has been a question that has been asked many times on this channel, and I'm going to answer it in this episode. So we are going to take a new installation of October CMS and we are going to push it to our shared hosting, because shared hosting is what most people use. Of course, there would be many variations if you would be using something like DigitalOcean or Heroku, where you have Git present and so on. So in this episode, I'm going to try to answer that question and give you some tips and tricks on how to do it better. So how to use Git FTP to push your files to the server, how to use env variables so that you can control the info for your database connections and so on. We are not going to be using the site that we were working on in the previous episodes, because that site is using SQLite database. And when you're using SQLite database, it's just a file, so you would just push it to the server. But we are instead going to use MySQL database, which most people would be using. So I will show you how to deal with that also. Okay, so first of all, let's create a new October CMS project. And we are going to do that by using Composer, create project, October deploy. So it's going to be called October deploy because we are deploying files to our server. Okay, so as you can see, I got some fatal errors here. This happened to me when I was testing this for this episode, but everything seemed to be working fine. So we are just going to now cd into October deploy. And now we should run PHP artisan October install. But before we do that, I'm just going to use this tool called SQL Pro. Depending on your local setup, you would maybe use something else. You would maybe use phpMyAdmin if you're using MAMP, XAMPP or WAMP or something like that. I'm using Laravel Valet. So there is an episode on this channel about using October CMS with Laravel Valet. It's very simple to use, and I have this Valet connection to my database. So I'm just going to create a new database and I'm just going to call it October deploy. Okay, now we have an empty database, and next thing we need to do, we need to run PHP artisan October install. And now it's going to ask us some questions. So the first one is which database type we are going to be using, and I'm just going to say 0 for MySQL. Localhost 3306. Database name is going to be October deploy. The login is going to be root. I don't have a password for it. So first name, last name. I will leave this address as it is. And admin is going to be admin. And the password is going to be admin123. Okay, is this information correct? Yes. And the application URL is actually going to be October deploy.localhost. Okay, do we want to configure advanced options? No. As you can see, migration did everything it needed to be done. And even if we go right here and reload this database, as you can see, we now have our database set up. Now let's just test out this page. So October deploy .localhost. And as you can see, we get our site right here. And if I go to the backend, we can log into it. Okay, and now let's just add something to it. So you would develop your site locally. I would just go to settings, go to updates and plugins, install plugins, and let's search for a blog plugin. So I'm going to install a blog. Okay, the blog is installed. Let's create a post. So we just say new post. Okay, my second post, save this. So just that I can show you once we push this site to our server, I can show that the database is actually transferred. And if I go to blog, you can now see that we have first blog post and my second blog post. Okay, so now we are ready to start developing some strategies for pushing our site to the web server. And to do that, first of all, you will run this command. So php artisan october env, I already run it, and you would get a file like this. So this is an env file which contains your app URL, app key, and most importantly, your database connection information. So October deploy, root, password, and that's it. Okay, so let's just refresh this page to see that everything works. This works. So why are we using this? So this env file, since we are going to use Git FTP to push our files to the server, so this env file is going to be set up for our local development. But we are also going to have another env file which is going to be set up for our production server, so the server on which our site lives on the internet. We are going to do that a bit later, but for now we created our env file. And the next thing you need to do is, of course, get yourself a hosting service. So for me, I'm using FastComet, and actually I bought this Plusnar domain, whatever it's called. So it's a randomly generated name. As you can see, this site is currently empty. So what do you need to do on the server? Now, you need to understand this. So first of all, I'm going to show you this, how everybody is going to have their first contact with the shared hosting setup. So I'm not going to have SFTP or SSH access, which you can get on most hosts by just opening up a ticket and saying to them, hey, please allow me to have SSH connection to your server, and they will do that for you. FastComet at least will do that for you. And we are not going to have Git present, so I'm going to show you how to use Git FTP, because we actually don't want to upload our files via FTP and so on. This is because while you're doing your local development, so when you change something, you don't want to remember the files you change and then manually upload them to the server, but Git FTP will do that for you. So first of all, since we are going to be using Git, I'm going to go to my site and I'm going to go to Git ignore, and as you can see, we currently have a vendor folder ignored. And this is because when you have SSH access and when you have Composer on your web server, you would ignore vendor files so that you don't have to upload them. Then you would SSH to your server and do Composer install, and then Composer would install all of your vendor files. But since I want to show this as bare bones as possible, we are actually going to remove vendor from Git ignore, and we are just going to upload them to the server. So we are removing vendor, and I'm just going to save this. Okay, so the next thing we need to do, we need to initialize our Git our Git. So I'm just going to do Git init, and the Git is initialized. I'm just going to add everything to it. And now we are going to commit those files. So git commit first commit. Okay, so now our files are committed. Now we need to set up our Git FTP. So to set up Git FTP, you would follow these instructions if you don't already have it set up. I have it on my system, of course, and also I have an episode about using SSH, SFTP and Git FTP to push your files to the server, so I'm not going to go in depth with it. You can check that episode, it will be in the cards. But just quickly, so to set it up, you can use these commands right here. So git config, git FTP URL, user, password, and so on. And down here you have installation instructions for your system. And as you can see, you have for Linux, Debian, macOS, and Windows. Okay, so but let's say you have Git FTP installed on your system. You would likely set this information up, but the quick way to do that was just to use something like, so I'm just going to go into my October deploy directory, and you will have this hidden directory right here called Git, and then you would have this file called config, and I will just paste in my information. So git FTP, FTP plusnar.com, and then this tilde right here represents your home directory and then public HTML. Because if I go right here, actually not here, but here, as you can see, I am already connected to my web server. And when I connect to it, you will of course get the information from your hosting provider. You will usually have this public HTML folder. So this is where your website is going to live. So right here, I'm setting this to get all the files that Git has committed and then push them to this public HTML folder. Of course, you would need your username, which for me is this weird one, and password is going to be your password. Of course, I'm not going to show it here. I will just set it up later. And that's it. Now we are going to push those files to our server, but first of all, I just want to say, if you don't want to use Git FTP, if you don't need it for some reason, you can of course just use programs like I'm using Forklift right here, or you can use something like FileZilla or whatever you want, and just push all of those files to your server via that program. Except for this env file, but you can push it also. It doesn't matter for now, at least. So just take all of your files and just push them to the server. You don't even have to push those files one by one, but you can zip them and then push that zip file to the server, which will be much quicker. And then you can go to your cPanel. Most of the shared hosting has zip panels, and search for file manager, and in the file manager you would just go to your public HTML, and okay, this is a bit slow right here, and you would go to your public HTML. You would have archive.zip or whatever it's called. You would just select it and press extract, and then you would extract all of your files on the server, if you want to do it that way. But we are going to try to do it quote unquote the right way, so by using Git, so that we don't have to remember the files that we changed and then push them to the server. But once we done with editing our site on local server, we would just push the changed files using Git. So git add, git commit, you add your commit, and then you just do git FTP push. Okay, so time for our first push, and I'm just going to do it like this. So first time you want to push your files to the server, you would just do git FTP init, and you can use this verbose flag because it's going to show you how files are being uploaded. If you don't do that, it's just going to say uploading, and then you would wait forever to upload. So I'm just going to do this. And as you can see, now Git FTP is buffering files for upload, and there are a lot of files. So keep in mind that this first push to the server is going to take a lot of time, up to an hour even, because it's going to push files one by one. But that's just the first time. Once you start developing, it will only push the files that have been changed, and it's going to go pretty quickly. But for the first time, it could take, depending on your internet connection, up to an hour. And also I would suggest that instead of just using regular FTP, you use SFTP once you get SSH access from your host. You can see that in the episode that I did about using Git FTP, in which I use SFTP, and also instead of password I am using my SSH keys. And now, as you can see, it started to upload files. As I said, it will probably take some time. For this episode, I'm actually going to cheat, and I'm going to use the first option, in which I'm going to zip all the files and then extract them on the server behind the scenes. So you can see what the result of this will be, because I don't have time right now to wait for this to upload. So once those files are uploaded, you will see something like this on your server. Notice that we don't have this .env file right here. We don't have it because it is ignored in our git ignore. So you don't want to add .env file to the server, but you want to create another env file which is going to be specific to your production server. But first of all, let's just check out our site to see what errors are we getting. So if I refresh this, of course, first of all, you get this error. So this error, it took me a long time to figure it out. This error is actually because my current server is using PHP 7.0 and it should be using PHP 7.1. So for this version of October CMS. If you're using older versions of October CMS, you may need PHP 7 or even PHP 5.6 and so on. So to do that, to handle that, most of your hosting companies today would have something called PHP, actually select PHP version. And if you go right here, as you can see, I'm using 7.0, so I want to use 7.1, set it as current. And if you don't have these options, then you should contact your server hosting provider and tell them, look, I want to use PHP 7.1 for my hosting option. And we're just going to set this to use defaults and save this. And now if I go right here and refresh the page, we are still getting some errors because no application encryption key has been specified. And now this is because we don't have an env file. But before we create that env file, we need to set up our database. So to do that, I'm just going to go to MySQL databases. And I'm going to create a new database called deploy. Okay, create database, go back. Now we have a database set up. Now we need to set up a database user, which is going to be also called deploy. So this is going to be our user and it's going to have a password of deploy123. Okay, create user, go back. And now you need to connect that user to the database. So you may have many users right here and many databases, depending on what you're doing on your shared hosting. But I only have one user and one database, so I'm just going to add them together and set this user to have all of the privileges. So make changes. Okay, and now that I did that, I'm going to go to this program of mine called SQL Pro. And right here, so we are in our October deploy database. I'm just going to select all of this and export it as an SQL dump. And I'm going to export it to my desktop. So I'm just going to export my database. Okay, the list of tables has changed. Let me reload this page then. Okay, try it again. And export them to the desktop. Now this is exported. So now I can search for something called phpMyAdmin. Some of you, if you're using MEMP, XAMPP or WAMP or whatever other local PHP development environment you're using, may have phpMyAdmin on your local host. So I'm just going to click on that, go to phpMyAdmin. And now, as you can see, this is the database that I created, plusnar deploy. And I'm just going to import the database I just exported. So on my desktop, we have this exported database. I will click open and then click go. And now, as you can see, I have my database set up. Now, the next thing we need to do, we need to create an env file for our production server. So I'm just going to copy this env file or duplicate it, and I'm just going to create a directory called deploy. So this is where my production server's env file is going to live. So this is my production env file, and of course the database is plusnar deploy. Let me just check this once again. Is it okay? So it's plusnar deploy, and also the username is plusnar deploy, and the password is deploy123. And I think that's all the things we need to change. You can also change this app URL, but it's not mandatory. So I'm just going to save this, and just because we may get some more errors, I'm just going to set this app debug to true for now, but later you should change it to false so that the users coming to your site don't see any debug information like we are getting right here. So they would just get this page cannot be reached or something like that, not hold the runtime exception. Okay, so I'm just going to go to my file manager and I'm going to copy this this env file from my deploy directory right here. Okay, so this is copied. Now let's test our site. Okay, so we are getting our site right now. Now you can just go right here, set the debug to false. You can set this app URL if you want, and that's about it. If I go to the backend, I should be able to use the username and password that I set up on my local host. So admin. Okay, and since we imported our database right here, if we go to blog, we should get first blog post and my second post. And that should be about it. As I said, I cheated a little bit in this episode when pushing the files to the server because I didn't have time to wait for everything to upload. But if you follow these instructions and did it the way it's supposed to be done, then when you change something on your server, you would just do git add and then git commit, and then you would just do git FTP push. So the second time you're pushing something to the server, you would use FTP push, and because Git FTP would use Git, it will just push the files that have changed to your server, and that's about it. Okay, so this has been it for this episode. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like the channel and the content I put out, you can subscribe to it, maybe, if you like. And if you want to ask me questions, you can use the social media for that. And very big thanks to my patrons. So I have a Patreon page. If you want to send some money my way, you can use the Patreon page for that. And to all my existing patrons, thank you very much. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.